Wale waliomuua kwa sababu yoyote hawawezi kuwa na amani.
February 20th, 2020. In a quiet neighborhood in Imara Daima, Nairobi, an administration police officer was found lying lifeless on the floor of his small rented house. A single gunshot had torn through his chin, exited the top of his head, pierced the ceiling, and continued through the roof. Beside him lay his service pistol. On his chest rested a spent cartridge. Nearby was a handwritten note that simply read, "Call my cousin Ben." At first glance, it appeared to be a straightforward case of suicide. But within hours, investigators began noticing details that simply did not add up. There was almost no blood on the floor. Neighbors had heard no gunshot. The alleged suicide note did not match the officer's handwriting. His phone data had been erased. His social media accounts had disappeared. And according to forensic investigators, the crime scene appeared strangely staged. The dead officer was Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei, 33 years old, a respected administration police officer, head of security at Harambee House Annex, the office of Kenya's deputy president. Just days before his death, Kenei had unknowingly found himself at the center of one of Kenya's biggest political scandals, an alleged fake 40 billion shillings military arms tender. He had become one of the most important witnesses. But before he could record his statement, he was dead. Was it suicide? Or was Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei silenced forever? In this episode, we retrace every known movement, every phone call, every unanswered question, and every piece of evidence surrounding one of Kenya's most mysterious unsolved deaths. Thursday, February 20th, 2020. It had been more than 12 hours since Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei had last answered his phone. For a man known for discipline and punctuality, his silence was unusual. His colleagues became increasingly concerned. Repeated phone calls went unanswered. Eventually, they decided to visit his residence at Twiga Court in Villafranca, Imara Daima. What they found would shock the nation. The main door to the small bedsitter was partially open. Inside, Kenei lay motionless on the floor. He was dressed in pajamas. He wore neither socks nor shoes. A single gunshot wound was visible beneath his chin. The bullet had traveled upward through his head before striking the ceiling. A Jericho pistol lay beside him. The weapon still contained 11 live rounds. A spent cartridge rested on the left side of his chest. Investigators also recovered a handwritten note bearing the words, "Call my cousin Ben." At first glance, everything appeared to point towards suicide. His body was removed from the house and transported to city mortuary. But investigators would soon realize that almost nothing about the scene made sense. To understand what happened, investigators first reconstructed Sergeant Kenei's final known movements. Every hour, every phone call, every witness, every detail. Monday, February 17th, 2020. According to security guards stationed at the main entrance of Villafranca estate, Sergeant Kenei entered the estate on foot sometime between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Nothing appeared unusual. One guard later described him as calm. Another remembered him carrying mangoes in one hand. He appeared cheerful, relaxed, like any other ordinary evening. No one noticed signs of fear. No one noticed signs of stress. Nothing suggested that within days he would be dead. Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. Early Tuesday morning, a neighbor who regularly gave Kenei a lift picked him up from Imara Daima. He was dropped at Harambee House Annex between 7 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. He remained at work throughout the day. Later that evening, around 8 p.m., Kenei was seen together with two fellow officers. All three had received summons from the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. They had been instructed to record statements regarding events that had occurred 5 days earlier. At approximately 8:30 p.m., Kenei completed his shift. He left Harambee House Annex. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive at his workplace, according to neighbors. He never returned home that night. It was a strange observation. Kenei's house was located behind the main residence. Anyone entering or leaving had to pass through a narrow corridor. Neighbors easily noticed his daily routine. Every morning, they saw him leave. Every evening, they saw him return. But not on Tuesday, not on Wednesday, not even on Thursday, until his body was eventually discovered. Wednesday morning arrived, just as they always did. Kenei's neighbors attempted to contact him so they could give him a lift to work. His phone rang, but nobody answered. They assumed perhaps he had already left. They drove away. Meanwhile, the tenant occupying the main house noticed something unusual. Kenei's door was slightly open. His clothes were still hanging outside. The lights inside remained switched on, even during daylight. She tried calling him. His phone was switched off. Concerned, she instructed her house help to keep checking throughout the day. Nothing changed. Thursday arrived. Still no movement, still no answer, still no sign of Sergeant Kenei. Eventually, the house help attempted to push the door open. She couldn't. A security guard came to assist. Together, they forced it open. Inside, they found Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei dead. But something immediately puzzled everyone present. There was almost no blood on the floor. For investigators, that observation would become one of the first major mysteries. Had Kenei actually died inside that room? Or had his body been brought there afterward? Those questions would remain unanswered. To understand why Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei's death immediately attracted national attention, investigators had to look beyond the crime scene. They had to look at what had happened just days earlier. A case that had already sent shockwaves through the country. An alleged 40 billion shillings fake military equipment tender. It was a scandal involving politicians, businessmen, foreign nationals, and one of Kenya's most secure government offices. And at the center of it all was Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei. February 13th, 2020. 5 days before he disappeared, Kenei was on duty at Harambee House Annex, the office of the Deputy President. As the officer in charge of security, one of his primary responsibilities was to screen visitors before allowing them into the premises. No one entered without clearance. That afternoon, former Cabinet Secretary Rashid Eshesa arrived at the annex accompanied by two men later identified as Daniel Otieno and Clifford Okoth. The visitors claimed they had an appointment. According to investigators, Kenei received them and escorted them into the waiting area before they were taken into a boardroom within the Deputy President's office. What appeared to be an ordinary security procedure would soon become one of the most important events in the investigation. According to detectives, it was during that visit that an alleged fake 39 billion shillings military arms contract was presented to two foreign businessmen. The alleged deal involved the American company Echo Advanced Technologies, LLC. Days later, the alleged fraud was exposed. The Directorate of Criminal Investigations launched a major investigation. On February 17, 2020, Rashid Echesa and his co-accused were formally charged in court. At the same time, detectives began examining everyone who had been present at Harambee House Annex on the day of the meeting. That included the officers responsible for granting access to the visitors. Among them, Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei. As investigations intensified, former DCI Director George Kinoti released CCTV footage from Harambee House Annex. The footage showed Sergeant Kenei escorting Rashid Echesa and his companions into the Deputy President's office complex. The images quickly spread across national television. Suddenly, the quiet administration police officer was no longer an unknown name. He had become one of the most important witnesses in one of Kenya's biggest corruption investigations. Detectives believed Kenei could explain exactly how the visitors gained access to one of the country's most heavily guarded government installations. Who had authorized the meeting? Who instructed him to let them in? And who else was involved? These were questions only Kenei could answer. A key witness. Investigators considered Kenei more than just another security officer. He had become a critical witness. He had been summoned by the Directorate of Criminal Investigations to record a statement. Together with two other officers attached to the Deputy President's office, Kenei was expected to explain everything that had happened on February 13th. According to reports, Kenei had even spoken at length with Rashid Echesa during the visit. Detectives hoped that his testimony would help establish exactly what had taken place inside Harambee House Annex. But before he could appear before investigators, before he could officially record his statement, he vanished less than 48 hours later. He was dead. The alleged fake arms tender case has continued through the Kenyan courts for years. In December 2021, Senior Principal Magistrate Kenneth Cheruiyot acquitted Rashid Echesa and his three co-accused under Section 215 of the Criminal Procedure Code. The court ruled that the prosecution had failed to establish a prima facie case because two foreign complainants had not testified. However, that was not the end of the matter. In February 2024, High Court Judge Kanyi Kimondo overturned the acquittal after an appeal by the Director of Public Prosecutions. Justice Kimondo ruled that the trial court had erred by dismissing the case solely because certain witnesses had not appeared. He found that the evidence already presented was sufficient to require the accused persons to present their defense. The case was therefore sent back to the Milimani Law Courts, but once again, the proceedings were halted. In June 2024, Rashid Echesa successfully appealed to the Court of Appeal. Justices Patrick Kiaja, Ali Aroni, and Lydia Ahodi issued conservatory orders staying the High Court's decision while the appeal was being heard. As a result, the criminal proceedings remain unresolved. The questions begin. While the fake arms tender investigation continued, detectives investigating Kenei's death found themselves asking a different set of questions. Was it merely a coincidence that a key witness died just before recording his statement? Or was there a connection between his death and the investigation? Those questions became even more significant when investigators began examining the circumstances surrounding his final hours. Because almost every new discovery only deepened the mystery. The scene did not resemble an ordinary suicide. The timeline did not make sense, and several pieces of evidence appeared to contradict the official theory. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn. The more detectives examined Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei's death, the less it resembled a straightforward suicide. Instead of finding answers, they found contradictions. Every new piece of evidence raised another question, and every question led investigators deeper into a mystery that remains unresolved to this day. Suicide or execution? The first and biggest question confronting investigators was simple. Did Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei take his own life, or was he murdered? If he had indeed died by suicide, detectives wondered how such an act could have taken place without anyone hearing the gunshot. The bullet had entered beneath his chin, exited through the top of his head, pierced the ceiling, and continued through the roof. A Jericho pistol fired at close range produces an extremely loud report. It is often compared to, or even louder than, the sound of a tire bursting. Yet not a single neighbor reported hearing a gunshot. Not one. The silence surrounding that crucial moment immediately became one of the most puzzling aspects of the investigation. 9 persons of interest. As investigations intensified, detectives identified 9 persons of interest. According to investigators, these included 4 individuals attached to the office of the Deputy President, 3 individuals from the Department of Defense, 2 employees from a mobile telecommunications company. The 2 telecommunications employees were alleged to have played a role in deleting data from Kenei's mobile phone and deactivating his social media accounts. Although investigators reported that much of the information had been erased, forensic specialists were able to recover part of the deleted data, which was preserved as evidence. Phone triangulation also revealed another significant development. Investigators established that 3 unidentified men had been in the vicinity of Kenei's residence during the period leading up to the discovery of his body. Who they were, why they were there, and whether they had any connection to Kenei's death remain unanswered questions. By this stage, investigators had reached one unavoidable conclusion. Sergeant Kenei was no ordinary witness. As the officer responsible for screening visitors entering Harambee House Annex, he was one of the few people who could explain exactly how Rashid Echesa and his associates gained access to one of Kenya's most heavily protected government offices. He knew who arrived. He knew when they arrived. He knew how they entered. And investigators believed he may also have known who authorized their entry. Former DCY Director George Kinoti later admitted that detectives had unknowingly lost the one man who could answer some of the investigation's most important questions. A crime scene already compromised. When homicide detectives arrived at Twiga Court, they immediately encountered another problem. The crime scene had already been disturbed. Police officers from Embakasi Police Station had removed Kenei's body before forensic investigators could properly examine the house. By the time former DCI Director George Kinoti learned what had happened, the vehicle transporting the body to City Mortuary had already reached the Nyayo National Stadium roundabout. Kinoti immediately ordered it to return to Imara Daima. The body was brought back so that scenes of crime officers could conduct a proper forensic examination before it was finally taken to the mortuary. For investigators, this early interference raised concerns that important forensic evidence may have been altered or lost. No gunshot, no struggle. Another mystery quickly emerged. A woman and her 2 children lived in the main house within the same compound as Kenei. They reported hearing nothing unusual. No shouting, no struggle, no gunshot, nothing. Access to Kenei's house required passing through 2 security checkpoints. The first was the main entrance to Villa Franca estate. The second led into Twiga Court. Yet investigators discovered that security guards recorded neither visitors' names nor vehicle registration numbers. Anyone could have entered. Anyone could have left, without leaving any official record behind. Investigators interviewed the guards who had interacted with Kenei during his final days. One female guard remembered seeing him enter the estate alone on Monday evening. She described him as calm and composed. She also said she had never seen visitors regularly going to his house. Another guard recalled that Kenei arrived carrying mangoes in one hand. He appeared cheerful, friendly. There was nothing about his behavior that suggested he was planning to end his life. These witness accounts would later strengthen the family's insistence that Kenei had shown no obvious signs of emotional distress. As detectives examined the room in greater detail, more inconsistencies emerged. The bullet had traveled through Kenei's head before striking the ceiling and eventually piercing the roof. Investigators removed the affected section of the ceiling for forensic analysis. Yet one detail stood out. Detectives observed an apparent absence of blood spatter around the bullet hole. They also questioned why there was little or no visible blood on the floor despite the fatal head wound. These observations prompted investigators to consider another possibility. Had Sergeant Kenei actually been shot somewhere else, and his body later brought back to the house? At that stage, detectives could not rule out the possibility. While forensic experts continued examining the scene, another team focused on reconstructing Kenei's final movements. His mobile phone records became one of the investigation's most important pieces of evidence. Detectives hoped the records would reveal who spoke to him last, where he traveled, and what happened during the final hours before he disappeared. But what they discovered would only deepen the mystery. Because by the time investigators gained access to his phone, much of the information had already been deleted. As homicide detectives continued examining the crime scene, another team focused on Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei's final communications, his phone, his messages, his financial transactions, his conversations. Somewhere within those final hours, investigators believed lay the key to understanding what had happened. Back in Nakuru County, Kenei's family was struggling to come to terms with the devastating news. What hurt them almost as much as his death was how they learned about it. They did not receive an official call from the government. Instead, they first learned of their son's death through media reports. The family questioned why they had to hear such heartbreaking news from television before being formally informed by the authorities. They appealed to the Directorate of Criminal Investigations to expedite the investigation and establish exactly what had happened. Speaking at his home in Chamasi's village, Kenei's father, John Chesang, firmly rejected suggestions that his son had taken his own life. I did not see any signs that he was disturbed or worried. If there was anything bothering him, he would have told me, or I would have sensed it from his demeanor. According to the family, Kenei had only recently visited them during the school midterm break. He had picked up his son and spent 2 days with his parents before returning to Nairobi on Sunday afternoon. After arriving safely in Nairobi, he spoke with his father. Everything appeared normal. But when the family tried calling him on Wednesday and Thursday, their calls went unanswered. They became increasingly worried. Then came the heartbreaking news. Adding to the family's disbelief was another painful reality. His youngest child had been born only 1 week before his death. He was also preparing for his wedding, which had been scheduled for August 2020. To those closest to him, these were not the actions of a man preparing to end his life.